Hey guys, Walls here. Welcome to a review session for plot, character, conflict, and setting. So, if you're watching this at home, this is the handout that we got in class, and I think I've also uploaded this to Google Classroom. But these are the notes that we're going to start out with. So, I know some of us haven't had an English class in a while, maybe even like a calendar year. So, we're going to go over kind of the basic elements of storytelling here for the first week, and as we get into our first short story. So let's review. Now, we know that the main character of the story is called the protagonist, and that the character working against the protagonist is the antagonist. Now, it's easy to think of the protagonist and antagonist as good guy versus bad guy, but in a lot of storytelling nowadays, especially, the protagonist. Here, I guess I can do this so you can follow along. The protagonist is not always a good person, objectively or subjectively speaking. So think of movies or films that you've watched or stories that you've read where the main character of the story actually is a mixed bag of a person, some good, some bad, or even in some cases, maybe the bad guy is the main character in the story. So the protagonist, just make a note here, not always good guy. That's too thick here. So the protagonist is not always the good guy. And you got to think about this. The antagonist is not always a person. Maybe it's a group of people. Maybe it's maybe the antagonist is a force that's working against. Nature can be an antagonist. One of my favorite movies, Meg. The antagonist is a giant shark. Nature. All right, so then you've got your protagonist and your antagonist, and then as we analyze the story, we always want to talk about whether or not characters are dynamic or static. I like those terms. Do the characters change over the course of the story, or do they stay the same? So usually protagonists, the main characters of the story, change. They go on some kind of journey. There is a transitional moment in the story where they're like, aha, I am different now in some important way. And usually bad guys are kind of static. They are a one-note character. They kind of stay the same and help change the protagonist. It doesn't always work like that, but that's usually how it goes. All right, then we talk about plot. Now, this is all basic stuff here. When we talk about plot, we talk about exposition. That's where the characters are introduced. We're introduced to the setting. The rising action introduces the problems or conflicts. And I always like to focus in on our stories on the inciting incident. What is the event? What is the singular thing that kicks off the action in the story? All right, then we talk about the climax. That's the turning point of the plot. It's easy to think of a short story as having equal parts rising action, exposition, rising action, equal parts following action, resolution. But as we read our first story, especially, we'll see that sometimes the climax of the story comes rather early, and most of the story is following action or resolution. Now, these are key notes right here. We need to make sure we understand the difference between a flashback and a foreshadowing, and how authors use flashback and foreshadowing to manipulate our perception of time within the context of the story. We all have had that experience where we have no idea what's going on in a story, and then the author gives us a little bit of information that's already happened, and that kind of clues us in or helps us better understand why characters are doing what they're doing or behaving the way they're behaving. And that's flashback, when we get something that's already happened and it helps explain the story or character to a reader. Foreshadowing is where the author gives us clues. Now, foreshadowing can be kind of tricky. In the story we're going to read today, and in a lot of the stories, the author wants us to think a certain thing is going to happen, but the author uses foreshadowing, uses clues to manipulate us so that when something different happens, we're surprised. The author creates tension within our expectations. And we like that. As human beings, I think we kind of like in a story to be surprised, or we want to know if we're going to, if our guesses are correct when the author gives us clues. And we all know how defeating it is, and how it can be kind of annoying when we go see a movie with a friend, and within like the first 10 minutes of the movie, that your friend is like, oh, I bet this, and this happens. It just kind of takes some of the fun out of it when you start trying to, if you think you've pegged it down. So good authors, I guess authors of effective stories use foreshadowing in a way that keeps us engaged, but doesn't necessarily give us too much information. All right, so we are going to create, after we read our story, we're going to create a basic plot map with this story, and I'll walk you through that in a separate video. So right now, what I want you to do, let's go to the next page here. I want you to, and you can do this on Google Classroom through Formative, or you can just write your answers here and take a picture of it and get it back to me. But I want to make sure you've done this. So I'm going to give you guys a second here to read this passage, this short paragraph, and answer numbers 1 and 2. And then I'll come back and I'll go over the correct answers with you and why those answers are correct. So pause the video right now, read the passage, answer the questions. Okay, you've unpaused the video now. You've answered the questions. Let's see how we did. Now, I love this passage here because it's kind of like a short story in and of itself, even though it's part of a larger story. So check out the language here first. I think the author does a great job of kind of building tension. When you have, becomes scarce, the house is emptying out, lighted only by kerosene lamps and turned low, we're plunged into gloom. You've got spooky vibes here. But then I love this sentence right here. Elizabeth Willard had an adventure. So right off the bat, we're expecting to see some kind of adventure. The character is going to go on a journey. Of course, the character doesn't go very far, like literally down a hallway, but still. So let's talk about what happens here. How does the reader know that Mrs. Willard is a sick but determined person? So these are our key character elements that we're determined on. And we're going back into the passage to look for details that show us she's sick. Okay, where do we find evidence that she is sick? She steadied herself with her hand. She's not doing very well. She breathed with difficulty. She had been ill in bed for several days. So the author there tells us that she's not doing well. And then here we see that she is determined because even though she's not feeling well, she hurried forward. She still kept going down the hallway, even though it wasn't going well for her. So the correct answer there is D. And this is an example of when an author shows versus tells. Some characterization is going to happen basically through the author saying this person is like this, this, and this. A lot of characterization happens when we have to take a look at what the character does and says and guess. All right, which event in the plot happened before all other plot moments mentioned? This is just sequence of events. This is your inciting incident. Her son has not come to visit. We see that up here where it says she had been ill in bed for days and her son had not come to visit her. That was the inciting incident that got this thing going. So, in the future, when I talk about inciting incidents, this is what I'm talking about. All right, let's go on to the next page. Here's a brief passage from The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. Again, we're talking about plot here. So look for details, series of events, any elements that you think help you better understand a character, and then answer questions numbers 1 through 5. Our goal here is to get 3 out of 5 correct. So pause the video here, read the passage, answer the questions, and then when we come back, I'll go over them. All right, you've answered the questions. Let's see how we did. How does the reader know that the governor of New York, Theodore Roosevelt, is a highly emotional person? He bangs his fist as he speaks. That's another good example of show versus tell. What action taken by Archer during his life shows he did not want to be a politician like Theodore Roosevelt? So after he's not reelected, he did municipal work. He didn't try to become a politician. He didn't continue down that path. Which event in the plot described in the first paragraph comes immediately after his son's christening or baptism in the library? It is right here, his son staggering and learning to walk. That's just a series of events right there. Which phrase from the passage reveals how Archer feels about someone? This was tricky because, if you look at answer A that's the answer, the dullest and most reliable of Reggie Chivers' many sons. He's talking about the person who's Reggie Chivers' son there. But then you've got B. That's about Archer right there. There's characterization about Archer, but that's not what the question was looking for. It's kind of tricky. And sentence number 6 Sentence number 6 for number 5 is the correct answer there, which best demonstrates Archer doubted himself. If you go back to the passage and look at sentence 6 right here, Archer, as he looked back, was not sure that men like himself were what his country needed. That shows doubt. All right, there are your answers. So if you got 3 out of 5, doing solid. 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5, obviously, doing good there. So in the next video I post, I'm going to go over Land of the Slaughter. That's our first short story, and we're going to tie all of our short stories back to this information right here. So make sure you have this thing handy for future discussions of short stories. Hope you guys are having a good one. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.